The Oak Ridge Reservation holds an important place in our nation's history, and it continues to be a vital part of our national security and scientific research community. But parts of the reservation require cleanup as a result of decades of energy research. The U.S. Department of Energy looks to the Oak Ridge Site-Specific Advisory Board as the voice of the community on environmental issues. You're welcome to attend meetings of the Oak Ridge Site-Specific Advisory Board to learn more. Call us or visit our website.
Welcome, everyone. Just a few housekeeping things. Make sure you use the microphones, and if you have a question or a comment, please use your name tag to signal that you have something. Speak into the microphone so that we can capture everything properly. Just for everyone's the Q&A. During the Q&A period, the members will speak first, and then the public, we have a microphone if there's any questions from the public. Right now, everyone, please take a second and turn off your cell phones. That's if you have the right one, Jay. And we have comments from the DDFO, EPA, and TDEC. Jay, congratulations on your promotion.
Oh, thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Long time coming, but
yeah, my paperwork actually hit. My birthday's October 30, and it had hit actually October 30 last year, so I could actually remember that. And I was thinking, well, maybe 2017, October 30, and October 30 came and went. So it's kind of a nice late birthday present. So,
excellent. Comments from you?
I don't really have any major comments for tonight. I'll save those for the presentation that you'll either get a hard copy or an electronic copy out for sure.
Fair enough. Christoph?
Congratulations to Jay one more time.
And Connie?
Thank you. I also do not have any announcements, but I'd also like to tell Jay congratulations. Looking forward to work with you even more.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Chloe?
The public comment period is now open. Are there any members of the public who want to comment? Okay, as a Citizens Advisory Board to the Department of Energy on environmental cleanup, we want to encourage the community at large to attend and participate in our board and committee meetings. If you are unable to attend, please send your questions and comments to the address shown. Appropriate comments and questions will be read during the public comment section of the SSAB meeting and will be given the same consideration by the board and DOE as those given in person. Meeting schedules and ways to communicate with the board can be obtained by calling 241-4583 or by visiting our website.
Thank you. Do we want to start with your presentation or just?
Sure. I think Pete's he's got some hard copies, I think, that he'll hand out here in a minute. Maybe y'all can share.
One second, Jake. You get introduced.
Oh, sorry about that. You said start. So.
No.
That's okay. Don't steal my thunder from me, Jay.
And it's just enough time. We've delayed it long enough. So.
All right. So here's the confession. His name is John Arthur Mullis II. And he is the manager for the Department of Energy's Oak Ridge Office of Environmental Management. He's responsible for safely executing the environmental cleanup of the Oak Ridge Reservation, which entails successfully managing the cleanup of East Tennessee Technology Park, Oak Ridge National Laboratory, and the Y-12 National Security Complex. Before serving as the acting manager beginning on October 2016, Jay was the deputy manager for the Oak Ridge Office of Environmental Management. In this capacity, he helped direct and support the office's division directors and federal project directors to ensure federal oversight and progress conducting environmental cleanup across the Oak Ridge Reservation. Prior to that, in February 2015, he was the acting deputy manager and director of the Engineering, Safety and Quality Division for the Oak Ridge EM office. Additionally, Jay led the SEB that resulted in the award of the UCOR contract. Jay holds a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering from the Citadel, the Military College of South Carolina, and he's a licensed professional engineer in the state of South Carolina. He completed extensive training and was qualified as a nuclear engineer while working for the Navy at the Charleston Naval Shipyard and has been fully certified facility representative for the DOE. Jay has more than 30 years of federal service. His experience consists of approximately 9 years working on the Naval Nuclear Propulsion Program at Charleston Naval Shipyard, with the balance of his service working for DOE in various assignments related to environmental restoration, decontamination and decommissioning, and waste management activities. He has led or been a member of numerous audits and assessments, including conduct of operations and conduct of maintenance assessments.
All right, now to this. So there's been a lot of information, a lot of misinformation out there about what the 45-day review is and isn't. I think for a while, some folks thought that it was new initiatives that would be started and might, for instance, take money from Oak Ridge, send it to Savannah River, WTP, somewhere like that to start a new initiative. And that's really not what the 45-day review is about. So the way this thing kind of kicked off was when Jim Owendoff became appointed as EM1. A few days after that, he got us all together, all the field managers, and said, and the headquarters staff as well, senior staff at headquarters said, I want you to go look if there's anything out there that you need a decision on, if there's anything out there you're waiting on headquarters for, if there's anything out there you think we could do better, I want you to put it together and send it up. And you know, it's kind of an open book as far as what you could send up to headquarters. And so Oak Ridge, I want to say we had something over 18 or 20 items. We overachieved. Most sites sent 8 or 9. And then within that 45-day window, it wasn't just come up with the ideas. It was then take those were quickly screened down to a smaller set. And really that quick screening was more of a kind of a gross screening where this is stuff we know we're not going to do. After that, they pulled together all the field managers, much of the senior staff in the field, same at headquarters, and we spent about a day on a VTC, each organization briefing theirs, and then there were teams put together to winnow those down further, which ones we actually wanted to go do something with, and then they were binned. And I can't remember all the bins because the bins were, if you've ever met Jim Owendoff, he's kind of a interesting guy with a lot of personality. So it wasn't, you know, something in a nomenclature like to do now. It was boil, do, simmer. So that's the kind of terminology that was used. And so we ended up with 5 items that I'm going to talk to tonight that were presented by Oak Ridge that are being worked. There were a number of other items that I'm not going to talk a whole lot about that we sent up as well. Those were mostly internal business system related items. So as you can imagine, the department has a number of information and business systems that we use internally. Some of those, in our opinion, have redundancy behind them. There's multiple systems we have to feed on a monthly and quarterly basis. There are authority levels that we think ought to be in the field that headquarters thinks ought to be at headquarters, you know, so anything I have to send up to headquarters to have approved just takes longer because more people have to look at it and there's more questions that you have to answer. So all that kind of internal stuff, which I really don't think you probably care about here, were things like have a single system for lessons learned, give more authorities in the field, raise our procurement authority so I don't have to send all my procurements up to headquarters, things like that. And then there were some here, and many of those, by the way, were grouped together. We're not the only site that puts stuff like that in. So there's a number of initiatives internal to DOE where a lot of those information system type items have been grouped together. And so there's several of those initiatives going on as well. So the things I'm going to talk about tonight are the things that are actually work-related, field work-related, that affect Oak Ridge, because I figure that's what most folks down here care about, is the stuff that actually directly affects cleanup. Let's see if there's anything I missed on here. And so anyway, we had the 5 items here. Okay. So if you want to go, if you want to go to the next slide, Jay, go to the next slide. So our first initiative was to establish a path forward for the non-radiologically contaminated elemental mercury. As you know, over at Y12, we've gotten some additional dollars to go after some of the excess facilities. One of those Alpha 5 and the Colex equipment that's outside of Alpha 5. We've actually removed 1.2 tons now of elemental mercury out of the equipment that's outside of Alpha 5. That we did not expect that when we got into it. We're a little over 50% done draining the systems that are there, so we suspect we're going to end up with about 2 tons of mercury. To give you an idea of what that is, that's about 21 gallons is about 1.2 tons of mercury. It weighs about 113, 114 pounds per gallon. So we've got that sitting over there, and we're kind of, and this initiative is because we're kind of caught in a, what I would call a catch-22. RCRA regulations say if you have elemental mercury, the way you dispose of that is you recycle it. A while back, there were some amendments put in the TSCA regulations that say we don't want mercury in commerce. So what I've got is one regulation that says recycle and another one that says don't you put that out in commerce. So what happens is I have to store that. Well, EM doesn't want to store mercury. I'm in the business of getting rid of hazardous material, not storing it. So for the radiologically contaminated mercury, we can actually amalgamate that and send that for disposal out to NNSS. And we actually did that with some mercury last year that we had at ETTP that we had sent off. I think it was Bechtel Jacobs actually had sent it off. That's how long ago we had it. Had it treated and amalgamated, and it was sent back as some of the no-path waste that was in K1065. We actually got a waiver through EPA, I think that's Region 6, out in Nevada, and we're able to ship that out and dispose of 38 drums of that waste. We'd like to do the same thing with this. We'd like to be able to amalgamate this. There's a company in Pennsylvania that can amalgamate it, and then we dispose of it in Canada where the RCRA regulations don't apply, in our opinion. So we're trying to get clarification with headquarters support that we can go that path and get rid of it. Right now, we're draining it, putting it in flasks, and storing it in Alpha 5. So that's what this initiative is here. So the next one we had is macro encapsulation within the cell. So to orient you here, and what I'm talking about is for the new cell that we're proposing. And so to orient you here, here's the existing. Right now, the sites we're evaluating, there's a site here that we're evaluating. This is the haul road. And so it's several sites down this way and over here and a combination of sites. We're still in formal dispute with TDEC and EPA awaiting an opinion or a decision out of the regional administrator for Region 4, at which point we hope once we get that decision we can move forward with a proposed plan that we can put in front of the public. But in the meantime, in this particular facility here, if it's radiologically contaminated, I can bring the item, if it's debris that has radiological constituents, I can bring the item over and I can treat it in the cell. So if I need to macroencapsulate it, if I need to pour concrete around it, I can do that in the cell. If it's hazardous material, I can't do that. I have to do it at the work face. So if I tear something down, I have to treat it there before I transport it. What we would like to do is talk to EPA and the state once we move forward with that is could we get a CAMU here and be able to do treatment in the cell. As you can imagine, as we go after buildings and soils at Y12 and ORNL, we would like to be able to stockpile that over at the cell, and it would be more efficient for us to do that treatment at the cell as opposed to do it at each location, spaced out in time, and handle that over to the cell. So that is one of the discussions that we would like to have. So we're talking to headquarters about it right now. I think there has been some initial discussions and reach out to EPA on it as well. But that one will take a while because we need to get through the formal dispute first and move down the road a little bit before we can have that discussion. So that is the one that won't be done this year. The next one we had, this is MSRE, and molten salt reactor experiment. And by the way, I gave the same presentation last night to the city council. I started using lots of acronyms because you just kind of fall into that. So if there's acronyms here that you hear me using, I don't explain, feel free to interrupt me and say, what is that? So this is molten salt reactor experiment. give you an idea, this is going back to the high flux isotope reactor that Science operates. That's back in this area here. And these are the salt tanks that are in there. So these two are the fuel tanks. That's the drain tank. Back about 10 years ago, we went in and had a removal action where we removed most of the fuel. The fuel was plutonium and uranium, including uranium-233 that was dissolved, or dissolved is probably not the right word, but it was interstitial to the salts. And so the way we removed that was a chemical removal process with some probes where we heated, and you heated the salt, but not to the point where it was molten. You just heated it localized, not with the heaters that are around it, because this thing hasn't been operated since the 60s. And we sparged it. So there are trace amounts of those fuels left. There's also fission products in here, principally cesium and strontium. And so if you've ever been in MSRE, you enter on this side, and this is office space. In this high bay area is actually where the reactor was, and the control room's up here in the corner. And so if you walk out at ground level, these are actually underneath the ground, and there's shield plugs that sit on top of this. This area down in here runs 500 to 1,000 R. So it's pretty hot. And so one of the things we would like to explore, currently the interim rod says we'll remove all that material. It's salt, which means if I go to removing it, I'm going to disperse it. So it means it's a very hazardous operation for us. And so, because I'm not going to heat it up and drain the salt out at this point. What we would like to do is evaluate entombing this, similar to what NRC has done with certain reactors, similar to what some reactors have had done to them out at Hanford. So if you've been out at the Hanford site and seen some of the old reactors out there, they're entombed, and I think that's also the case for a couple of reactors down at Savannah River site as well. So that's one of the things we're doing an evaluation on, and it's simply an evaluation at this point. Based on the outcome of that evaluation, if it's a positive outcome, we would approach the state, because this is part of the ROD, it's also part of the STP, if I'm not mistaken, to eventually disposition this salt and remove it. So that is one of the things we're exploring right now and simply evaluating. Otherwise, you're probably talking a $300 to $500 million project sometime in the out years. This is one of the facilities that's degrading out there, and I'm spending a lot of money on S&M right now. So if there's some ways to get us to a safer posture much quicker, I'm certainly wanting to look at that. So that is one of the items we're evaluating right now. This is a good news story here. This is 3019. This is where all the U-233 at the laboratory is stored. Back in August, we actually completed the CUSP direct shipment, which is about half the radiological inventory. I couldn't announce that date for a while because that was secret, but now that we're several months beyond that date, it was done in August, which put us 10 months ahead of the original schedule. So at this point, you just see the corner of it, but right here is building 2026. What you have left, the CUSP containers, were these. So what you had were stainless steel containers about that high, cylinders, that back in the 80s, the CUSP material had been treated and turned basically into a ceramic matrix that was poured and let solidify on those, and that was what was direct shipped. What we have left are things that look like this, that are stored in cans that look like that. And it's things from hot cells, glove boxes, etc., that were being processed at the laboratory as part of their clean out. Those are items we need to go in and take apart and treat and down blend. So right now we have and we now own, this is a facility that Science owned. We used ARRA money and some additional funds that we gave to Science to clean these hot cells out. We've since taken over that building. We did that about this time last year. It was at the end of the beginning of the year. And we will have a design project underway where we will put a process in place that we can take small quantities that are in here, move them across, dissolve them, solidify them. And so what happens to us because of the funding profile that's in our target funding is we can't maintain the workforce during that design and build portion. So right now at the current proposed funding profile that we see in the future, We'll have to lay those folks off, go build it, hire them back, train them, and so you're talking about a 5-year lag before you're operating. Through a public-private partnership, there is a private company that wants us to milk the thorium. We'll do that by adding, and it's not a difficult process for us to add, we can add some ion exchange columns on the side, and you just pull it through, you pull the thorium off. We will hand that thorium over to this private company, or Isotech actually will hand the thorium over to a private company. They take the ion exchange, we don't get it back, and then they will go separate actinium out of the thorium, which is a daughter product from the thorium, and use that for cancer research and cancer treatment. And so that's a pretty good deal for us. To get the material, they're willing to give Isotech funds, so that helps us bridge the gap and pull that back. So we get a 5-year acceleration on this project by doing that. That languished at headquarters for about a year. When Jim got in and we put this in front of him, he's already signed off on the paperwork. We've already modified the Isotech contract to say you can go enter negotiations. So in essence, they'll give money to Isotech, who lets us kind of borrow the money because we'll pay Isotech back with payments over time. And what the private company gets for it is the thorium that we milk. So for us, it's a win-win-win, and we don't get any of the residues returned. They take all the, and it'll deal with all the waste that comes from that. So. So as most of you probably know, we were ready to ship to WIP a couple of years ago. In fact, we were 2 weeks away from making our first shipment when WIP shut down and kind of made us have to step back and say, what are we going to do? At that time, I was pretty full volume-wise with waste storage at TWPC, and I'd hit my radiological limits. Each one of our nuclear facilities has what we call a material risk limit or MAR limit, and that's just a limit of the amount of radiological material you can have. So you may be there at a volume, or you may be there at a radiological limit of how much isotopes you can have. We were approaching both of those, and we're hoping to ship to WIP when that hit us. So we had to come up with some innovative ways to store the RH, remote handled true waste, which is the most radioactive. We wanted to keep treating the waste at Transuranic Waste Processing Center, TWPC, because that was part of our STP milestone, and we did not want to lose the productivity factor that we had with. And so we designed these things that we call ROPS, which are basically just casks that we can take 3 55-gallon drums of remote handled true. It's a shielded cask. It has both concrete and poly in it, polyethylene, and put those down in it, and we can store them. These cost us about $23,000 a piece, and we purchased about 150, so we're about $3.5 million. This allowed us to continue to process the true waste, and so far we've got about 57 of these stored in UCOR facilities. So Northwind, who operates TWPC, processes it, fills it up. After they get a couple of them, UCOR will come over, pick it up, and bring it over and store it. These are 72Bs. This is the shipping container you have to ship the items in when you ship it out to WIP. This is not a certified shipping container. And so what we will have to do is bring these back over, take the material out, put them in the 72B, and send out there. Right now, while WIP is open for business, they're not open for business for remote handled. They're only open for business for contact handled. The way they were going to originally dispose of the remote handled waste is not put, if you've ever seen pictures of WIP, I was looking to see, we used to, I thought, have a picture around here. Anyway, you have these huge galleries in there that they mostly sit the material in. That's the contact handled. The remote handled, they were going to bore holes in the alleyways or the corridors and put them down in these holes. When they lost a lot of the mine, they've lost those areas that they were going to bore those holes. So they're looking at, as they add capacity now to the mine, where they can go bore to put that. In the meantime, we've proposed as part of this, how about we put the waste in those containers, ship it out to you. These are not contaminated. They have no radiological contamination on them. I can put this on a flatbed and ship it out as a regular shipment. Ship those out to you. You put it in here. You put that in the underground. Now it's contact handled. The added benefit is these are tall enough that they actually work as a column in the mine, kind of like that, and help support the roof of the mine. Because the roof tends to sag, and that's part of the reason they lost big sections of the mine, is they couldn't go put the roof bolts in because of the ventilation. They didn't have enough ventilation to run the diesels and the gas because you produce NOx, right? You're underground, you've got to have enough ventilation flow, and with the ventilation flow being very low, they couldn't do that. And so that's what eventually you get enough roof sagging that it's dangerous to go in there if you can't roof bolt. So that's one of the items we've suggested. Some of the folks at WIP were on board with it, but it takes a permit change with New Mexico, so they kind of lost momentum on that. Headquarters has picked that up, and we're hopeful that this will accelerate not only, otherwise I'm going to throw this away as scrap. So I'm going to buy $3.5 million worth of items, use it for a while, throw it away as scrap. If I can do this, I can ship it out there and not throw it away as scrap, and I also can use it to accelerate being able to do RH shipments. So headquarters is taking the lead on this one. Those are the 5 that we've got underway here. 4 of those we think will be done this year. That's probably on the next slide. These are other things that other sites have brought up you need to be aware of that have the ability to affect Oak Ridge, but Oak Ridge was not the lead. Oak Ridge was not the site that presented them. This first one, West Valley. The West Valley demonstration project up in West Valley, New York, has generated some true waste. Other than that, the project is done. And so right now they're just sitting, the waste is sitting there in casks on a pad. And what DOE corporately would like to do is to ship that waste somewhere else and shut that project down, because that's all that's left. We looked at this about a year ago. There's some issues on our side with having to change the documented safety analysis. If we were to take this material, we, Oak Ridge, would have to change the documented safety analysis because some of the material is hot enough that it's outside our current safety basis, which really means for those who aren't familiar with that, the nuclear license for the facility. In addition to that, it's not within the contract, so there's contract changes, funding issues. More importantly, when the deputy commissioner for TDEC was approached a year ago about this, she was not the least bit interested in bringing additional TRU into Tennessee, and this will take an STP change and a RCRA permit change. That was what stopped it before. This is being re-looked at now. I don't know where it will get within the DOE system. We have certainly told them that we don't think the state at this time is now interested in accepting that. So it's just something folks need to be aware of because it may affect us. The other one that could affect us, we didn't bring it up, but it's probably a good idea, is to relook at the metals recycling moratorium. Back in 2000-2001 time frame, BNFL, part of the contract with BNFL at the time, who did the K31, K31, K33, and K29 buildings, was that the cost of that would be offset because they could have the nickel that would come out and they could recycle the nickel. And about the time we got into that and thought we had a good project is when the secretary at the time said no recycle of nickel. Some of the folks may recall there were some things that came out about it being in kids' braces, it being in the swing sets, and that kind of shut it down, right? Because you couldn't prove that it wasn't volumetrically contaminated. So we've got all the nickel that we continue to store from that project sitting out at ETTP. As we close ETTP, we're going to pay several $1 million to transfer that over into space we have to make available at Y12 right now. And we would just continue to store it because the department views it as a surplus material, not as waste. And so when we've approached headquarters about let us throw it away, they won't let us throw it away, but we can't recycle it, so it's kind of like that. Mercury, we just continue to store it. And so that is what, if this is looked at and we can lift that moratorium, or, hey, let us throw, and we're not the only ones that have nickel and other strategic material like that, let us call it waste and get rid of it. And then I've already talked about the improvements to internal business systems. And so finally, this is where I jumped ahead. 4 of the 5 issues will be worked this year. The one that won't is the one on the CAMU, or the in-cell macro encapsulation, that we'd like to explore. And so this is really about looking for opportunities. It was no new initiatives per se. They were all things that have been hanging around for years. And, you know, I've looked through the items from all the other sites. For those items I'm at least familiar with, it's the same. There were no brand new, let us do this or let us do that. There's a lot of, hey, we've been having to hold on to this stuff, or can you give us the authority to do this? So with that, the presentation is over. I'll certainly entertain questions.
If you have questions from the public, use the microphone, please.
So do you want me to repeat the question so it gets in the record? Or?
Yes, please.
Okay. So the question was, the macro encapsulation I talked about, the proposal we'd like to make, is that for the current cell that we're using or the new circle cell we're proposing? It would be for the new circle cell that we're proposing.
Okay. Bonnie?
How far away are you from making a decision on where the new cell will be? What is the status there?
Right now, we're waiting on a decision out of the regional administrator to resolve the formal dispute that we're in. That's the EPA Region 4 regional administrator.
Is for the Scarborough?
No, the dispute has to do with the RIFS and some of the stuff that's in that. And whether we can move forward with a proposed plan to identify the proposed site and get that in front of the public. And so that's what the dispute is involving right now. And we just need a decision on that to know whether we can get the proposed plan in front of the public. And at that time would be when the public would be in, we would say, here's the site we're proposing, and what do y'all think about it?
But you don't have a site that you want to present yet? You haven't made that decision?
That is correct.
Okay.
The proposed plan would make that
Okay.
presentation.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry, Rudy?
Yes, sir. In your presentation, when you were speaking about the mercury, you indicated that it was from Alpha 5. What about the mercury that's being removed from Alpha 4, sir? Is that in the same venue?
That is not a EM facility right now, so I know that Y12 stores their mercury as well. But no, we're not looking at the Y12 mercury.
Will that eventually be an EM issue?
Or
is that like this?
NNSA would like to give it to us today. EM is not ready to take the facility without funding to be able to maintain the facility.
It all depends upon the funding.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Any other questions? Yes, Ed.
On the cell macro encapsulation, this will not really delay the design construction once that decision point is reached, right?
That's correct. This has, in my opinion, nothing to do with the design or construction of the cell. It would have to do with the regulatory framework and requirements to allow us to do in-cell macroencapsulation. So it would be something that eventually would have to be addressed in the ROD and the primary documents. But in my opinion, I don't think it would have a substantial change on the construction of the cell.
So it's the actual operation, right?
Yeah. In my opinion, I mean, my regulator may have a different view of that, but I don't want to speak for them. That might be what we would propose to them anyway.
And lastly, I guess these 5 points are kind of nice points. Was the forcing criteria on these 5 items was it money or delays or?
Well, money is delays, right? Any decision we put off. For instance, I continue to store and have for many years a lot of nickel that probably has very little value at this point. I mean, that's part of what, in some ways, I think BNFL wasn't that upset when we made that decision, because when the contract with BNFL was signed, nickel was very expensive, and then it just did this and plummeted. So I've just been storing material that I'm shuffling around, right? I have to continue to have fire protection systems, et cetera, so it just costs money. So any delay is costing us money. So it's both those things. Really, the decision about what we do now, what we put off, what we look at further was more based on, can we do it in a year? And will this have a big payoff if we come do it? In some cases, there were a couple of things we proposed. I won't get into the details of it because it's procurement sensitive, but there were a couple of things we proposed to let us go do X that, in my opinion, in the past at least, when Oak Ridge had approached headquarters about doing X, headquarters has said, no, you're not going to do that. So we said, let us do this. And they said, well, that's the site manager's decision. We don't need to put on the 45-day review. Go make that decision. I didn't think I had that authority, but okay, I do now, right? So there were a couple of things like that that they just kicked back to the side and said, you're empowered to do it, go do it. So we're moving out on those things as well. So,
Thanks, sir.
Sure.
John?
No.
For the initiatives that you talked about, is there funding already in place for that, or headquarters have to provide additional funding?
No.
How does all that work out?
None of this should require additional funding. So, and that was part of, in fact, it should actually save money, right? I mean, there'll be a little bit of additional costs going off and evaluating, for instance, the salt, but doing an engineering evaluation is not a super expensive item to go do. The thing about the mercury, if we can get rid of it, the money, eventually I've got to get rid of it, so the money is there. Eventually I tear Alpha 5 down. It may be a long time from now, but eventually I tear it down, and now what do I do with the mercury? Do I do what I'm doing with the nickel? I just keep shuffling it around? So it really, in fact, just the opposite. I would say some of these, if we can do, it actually saves us funds, right? Reduces the life cycle cost. For instance, the thing at Isotech, if we get that private money coming in, that actually collapses the schedule and collapses the life cycle. And I get rid of the material about 5 years earlier than I had planned to. So.
Okay. I got a question for you.
Sure.
Can you go back to slide 5? That's the transuranic, excuse me, the,
MSRA?
Yes.
Okay.
If you cocoon what you have on the right, what parts of, and you said your continuing maintenance on that facility is costly. What's going to be left after you cocoon it? Are you able to tear down what we're seeing on the left or not?
That would be part of what the evaluation would look at to see what you could do. But if you want Jay Mullis to editorialize, and I'm always, as an engineer, happy to do that, based on what I know about the facility, you would probably end up just entombing this and making a monolith there. Most of the rest of the systems, while contaminated, are not huge quantities. Some of them are very hot radiologically, but they're not large quantities. So that is things we could probably go in. It's a lot of small tubing, a lot of small piping. You can snip that remotely and disposition that. And so, my vision would be all that's gone, and what you have left is just kind of this square concrete subterranean monolith left. So.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you, Jay.
Absolutely.
I skipped over an item early on. Our next meeting is Wednesday, February 14th, 2018. So we do have both December and January off. The topic then is going to be excess contaminated facilities, and that has been a topic that we're all interested in, and especially since Oak Ridge is going to get extra monies in that vein. So that's the end of our public meeting. If you want to stick around for the business meeting, it's up to you. Are there any additions or for the agenda this evening? Hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll make the motion to approve the agenda. Anita?
Motion has been approved and has been Seconded. All those in favor, raise your right hand. Okay. Thank you. It looks like it passed. Going over to the motions. Richard?
I've read a copy of the minutes from our last meeting, and I believe they are accurate, and would like a motion to approve. Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor of accepting the minutes as written? Approved by raising your right hand. Thank you. Richard?
Oh, yes. We have one consecutive absence. Rosario Gonzalez.
She's here.
She's here.
Oh, okay. Oh, great. Oh, great. Go. Never mind. Everything. Well, I'm sorry. I tried to get a hold of you and wasn't able to, and I got a hold of Tara and found out what was going on with her. So I'm sorry. I apologize. I didn't mean.
Okay. Responses to recommendations and alternative DDFO's report. Melissa?
We currently have responded to all recommendations, and I don't have anything else tonight.
Okay. Were there any changes to the work plan? Just tonight's?
Just tonight's presentation.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. Time for the committee reports. Ian's stewardship. Fred is not here this evening. John Tapp's going to.
The committee met on October 25th. We had in attendance 9 board members and 2 non-board committee members, as well as our state representative and our student representatives and some others. Our topic was reviewing and commenting or discussing the presentation that David Adler had done at the last board meeting. And all of this is in response to part of our work plan. And as part of getting ready for this presentation, I did a little bit of research. So as I quickly hit the highlights of the meeting, I'll maybe interject a few comments. But I thought it useful. If you haven't read that, it was given to us back earlier. The text of DOE's request of us was as follows: completion of site cleanup measures across large portions of ETTP are accelerating and expected to present opportunities for land transfer, as well as site redevelopment, including new facilities to interpret and communicate the site's history. This board, or SSAB's awareness and input on these important program objectives is requested. So David made his presentation, and at the EM Stewardship Committee meeting, we discussed several topics related to that. One was Duck Island and about some of the restrictions that were there related to Duck Island and redevelopment of that property, and Roger Petrie was there to answer questions about that. Another topic we discussed were the rail cars at ETTP and if anything could be done to make that look a little better. The general conclusion there was that that's all been converted to a private party, and so there's not much can be done there. We talked a little bit about the future airport and what the situation there was, and it was kind of pointed out there were several unknowns still there. Recent newspaper articles indicate that the Metro Knoxville Airport Authority is really pushing hard for the airport, and committed like 170 acres for that project, subject to FAA approval. So if I say anything out of line, you guys correct me. So We had a discussion about deed restrictions and about all the deed restrictions that would be on the transferred properties because the properties were classified as brownfields and who would enforce those deed restrictions and all of the ins and outs of that. Note that Melissa has scheduled for our November EM Stewardship Committee a discussion and presentation on deed restrictions. So there's some questions whether we want to have a November EM Stewardship meeting. We are, and that's going to be the topic. Ed brought up some questions about revenue from property sales. He was kind of trying to follow the money, I think, and so we had some discussion about that. I did quite a bit of research on that. I won't bore you with all the details of that, but if you're interested, see me, and I'll be happy to clue you in on that. There was some discussion about Happy Valley and the fact that it had been sold as a surplus property. It's a 160-acre property. That newspaper reports that part of the transfer, there were deed restrictions on that, so it couldn't be used as residential. We had a little bit of discussion about acreage transferred and who had gotten the acreage, and there were some newspaper reports that seemed to conflict what David had given in his presentation. And Melissa and David put their heads together after the meeting, and they sent us some information, but the bottom line was the newspaper was reporting on the entire ETTP site, which was 2,200 acres. David was reporting on the heritage part, which was the 577 acres. And there's about 500 acres in the horizon part that was transferred before EM got in charge of the reindustrialization. Let's see. There's also, based on some, so that means about 1,077 acres have actually been transferred from DOE to the ETP site. And that acreage doesn't include another 3,000 acres, which is part of the Black Oak Ridge Conservation Easement. That was originally part of the same site as most of it's contiguous to the site. I guess all of it's contiguous to the site on the north side of the site. As best I can tell, that is, DOE still owns that, but there's a agreement with Tennessee Wildlife Resources Association, TWRA, to manage that. Is that roughly correct?
That's correct. I think I've heard the term enduring and indefinite, but basically it's a chunk of land that will be managed by the state for as long as they're interested in managing it and for as long as DOE has no higher use for the land. So it's a long-term conservation easement.
Related to environmental matters and green space, in addition to that 3,000 acres of conservation, about 500 acres or a half of the Horizon Center is also dedicated to green space. And there's a lot of land in the Heritage Center that's supposedly dedicated to green space. It's already been used for green space. There's like a 100-acre native meadow, some restoration, an arboretum, a sculpture garden, a biofuels research on native switchgrass, pine restoration, greenways, and other things. So we kind of feel like some information on that is, would be valuable to making comments related to future green space land transfers. So kind of the bottom line of the meeting was, we asked Melissa during the meeting what were kind of the issues that DOE was really want us to focus our comments on. And she said, well, right now there really didn't seem to be any. They just wanted to make us aware of what was going on. And most of the focus with the thing some of us attended out there was really geared towards historic preservation. And as I went back through some of the old minutes, the ORSSAB has been involved in the historic preservation, providing comments, because we are a consulting party in the Memorandum of Understanding between all the historic preservation agents. And Martha has been serving on a committee, from what I understand, providing design input to the thing. She's kind of shaking her head. I don't know if that's a yes or a no.
I've been there.
So we have been at least theoretically commenting all along, either by vocal or by being there, I guess. So kind of the bottom line was we felt like maybe additional comments at this point in time aren't appropriate. And part of that is because we don't know a lot about the other activities. We know quite a bit about historic now, and David gave us a good background on some of the other things, but we don't know much about the green space activities and what lands may eventually be future green space and some of those kind of things. In that regard, DOE is scheduled and the ETTP as as the last work topic of this year's work plan. And so the agenda says we're going to have a detailed presentation by a couple of guys and all of that kind of thing. So we feel like at this point in time, we ought to hold any other comments in abeyance until we go through that other presentation and collect information, between now and then. I've collected quite a bit of information, 3 or 4 pages here. If anybody on the issue management group would like that information, just give me your email address. I'll be happy to send that out to you. I plan on collecting additional information as it becomes available. A lot of the information I've collected so far has been online from newspaper articles and the past minutes and all that kind of thing. So I think most of it's relatively accurate, and David and Jay seem to kind of indicate most, at least what I presented tonight was accurate. So hopefully everybody knows how inaccurate sometimes internet obtained information is. So, but we'll continue to try to verify the information so when we get to the next phase of this commenting on ETP, maybe we'll have a little bit more information to work from. That concludes my report.
Okay, thank you, John. Any questions for John? Okay. Executive meeting took place a week ago. Several topics have already been mentioned several times in this meeting. One was centered around our lack of knowledge about the deed restrictions and how we're going to move forward. And the decision coming out of that was to put together the presentation that's coming up at the EM stewardship meeting later this month. That should enlighten us as far as and fill in the gaps in most of our background as far as how to move forward in those particular areas and who has responsibility for what in those situations. Now the discussion has already been talked about as well. Is Ed's proposed recommendations were brought up at the chairman at the executive meeting, and I've gotten back to him as far as some of the background and how we're going to move forward with any of those proposed recommendations. With that, I don't have anything else from the executive committee right now. Any questions? I attended the fall chairs meeting out in Hanford site with Richard and Shelley and Dave Adler. That was my first trip out to the Hanford site, and it is incredible. It's 615 square miles compared to what we've got here at this site. Their budget is well deserved to be 5 times what ours is, only because of the size of the operation that they have. But the problems that they've got and some of their solutions are match the size of the site. The distances between the reactors out there and the even the waste disposal site you're talking 5 to 15 miles driving distance between the various components that were on the site, and that was mainly for security. They didn't want everything next to each other. But the historical site part of it, they've done a good job of putting together their part of the national park for the Manhattan Project. If anyone has a chance to go out in that area and visit, take both tours. It's very enlightening and well worth it. That was the first day out there. Then we came back and they had 2 days of meetings. Jay has already covered some of the topics, the main topics that are pertinent to us. We're getting extra monies for excess facilities. And I don't think it's totally locked in yet as far as I took from the meeting, but there were 3 particular buildings, one of those being up on the screen up there. The biology complex and one other that I had on here was over at Y12 as well, and that was Beta 5. Beta 4, sorry. Yeah, the tool facility, right? Okay. The initiative and challenge that has been put forward with the new administration is they do support the mission of EM. There's showing it fully by the budgeting. But at the same time, it's been a good challenge to say that everybody has to find a better way to share successes and share the efficiencies and best practices because everybody is going to be budget challenged going forward. As Jay mentioned earlier, the overhead for infrastructure continues to increase. That you don't want to take that money away from the D&D efforts to revitalize the sites. So figuring out how to maintain the facilities at a reasonable cost without stealing from one hand and put it together is important. Waste isolation pilot plant, it's key to all the sites missions that are out there. The supplemental ventilation will come on line next month, according to what we're told, and that should start expanded shipments. Our proposal from the chair's meeting in the spring to increase the size of the pad for storage of waste out there at the WIP site was we got a response of being thanked, but we cannot use that as a storage facility, just so that we can get it off of all of the sites around the United States and ship it out to WIP. That's to be used only when WIP shuts down. So it's not a storage site for all of us to, all of our sites to just ship our waste, waiting in line for it to be introduced into the waste isolation pilot plant. There was a suggestion by Stacy Carbonneau that there's a paper out there from Energy Communities Alliance that she thought was a very good read, although DOE does not really agree with all of the suggestions that are in the document. They said it's a very good read and background for all of us. And again, it's out there by the Energy Communities Alliance. It's called Waste Disposition. A new approach to DOE's waste management must be pursued.
The U.S. Department of Energy is cleaning up the Oak Ridge Reservation of residual hazardous and radioactive contamination left over as a result of decades of nuclear energy research. Much of that work has been influenced by the Oak Ridge Site-Specific Advisory Board, a citizens panel that provides independent advice and recommendations on DOE's cleanup operations. You're welcome to attend the meetings and be part of this important work. For more information, call us or visit our website.